Thank you, Mr. Chair. First item this afternoon is the first of our 3 delegations. I'd like to invite Joanne Dumas from the Societe Francophone de Maillardville to come forward, who's here to speak about her feasibility study in Francophone Cultural Centre.
Someone's supposed to join me, but he's stuck in traffic. So.
Welcome, Joanne.
Bonjour.
Hi, bonjour tout le monde. So, first of all, thank you so much for giving me and my board member an opportunity to bring you the final copy of our feasibility assessment. So, so my name is Joanne Dumas, to make it official, and I'm the Executive Director of Societe Francophone de Maillardville.
Joanne, just remember you have 5 minutes.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
With me, he's not there yet, but coming will be Ruben Guindin, which is a member of our Board of Directors. We are here before you to express our needs and our involvement and support in the presentation of our proposal and key findings of the Community and Facility Needs Assessment 2016 Survey for a Francophone Cultural Centre in the historic French-Canadian neighborhood of Maillardville, Coquitlam. First, I would like, on behalf of the Board of Societe Francophone de Maillardville, like to say thank you very much for the city for financing this initiative in order for us to move forward. This is the 8th feasibility study that Societe Francophone has done since 1986. All the studies have the common objective to support the visibility and preservation of the Francophone heritage in Maillardville, provide adequate space for Francophone service delivery, attract business and tourists to the Maillardville area, and establish a destination facility to showcase the French-Canadian culture and history of the Maillardville region. The findings of our community facility needs assessment demonstrate time and time again that the need for a Maillardville Francophone Cultural Centre to preserve the historic French-Canadian cultural heritage of Maillardville and Coquitlam and support Francophone language programs and activities in this region. The top 10 core themes of interest for French programming and service include arts and culture, education, events, environment, history, programs and services, children and youth, families, seniors, and of course, food and wine. The survey identified key elements for a new facility and for the SFM. Multi-purpose rooms, gallery, library, French library, meeting space, a cafe bistro, theater, and venue space. The 5 key findings of the community needs assessment: Francophones and Francophiles want a community gathering space in Coquitlam that can attract a high number of people from across the Lower Mainland. Demand for quality French programs for children is high on the list. Coquitlam has an opportunity to celebrate its unique Francophone Maillardville heritage and that we are at risk of losing, as you well know. Opportunities for programs expansion is needed, especially with French-speaking newcomers, Korean and Chinese families who are interested in the Canadian linguistic duality. An expansion of SFM's work is consistent with Coquitlam's cultural and heritage strategic plan and provides opportunities for economic development. When we consider the Metro, Vancouver, and Fraser Valley, over 300,000 people are French-speaking, according to Statistics Canada, and the fact that the Francophone School Board of British Columbia has the fastest growing student population in BC, we certainly can take advantage of those points. There's no doubt. Our organization has contributed to the sustainability and visibility of Francophone cultural activity in Coquitlam for 37 years with different activities that we do, as you all know, Festival du Bois and different events. Our Maillardville cultural event project and festival include Festival du Bois, Saint-Jean-Baptiste, Maillardville en Fête, the commemorative Maillardville bronze plaque for the 75th anniversary in front of Our Lady of Lourdes, and so much more. We provide Francophone programming for youth and adults such as Naturalists Walk, summer camp, French classes for youth and adults, French book club, social events such as Beaujolais Nouveau, geocaching to discover Francophone history of Maillardville, and so much more. Our location on Brunette in Maillardville is a point of contact for many French-speaking newcomers to the region from British Columbia, Canada, and internationally. We constantly get inquiries from Chinese, Koreans, and European parents who are seeking enriched French immersion language and community French programs to their children. My name is not Ruben, but I'll say I'm Ruben, okay? This part, I'm going to read. Yes?
You're at 5 minutes, so if you got...
I'm up 5 minutes already?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So... I'll just say one thing. Maillardville, the heart and soul of French-Canadian culture in British Columbia, has no place that its people can call its own. And I want you to remember a place that we can create the necessary activities to keep the heart pumping. Merci.
Thank you. And if we can just keep our questions to questions today. We've got a lot on the agenda, please. Councillor Reid.
I just want a few clarifying questions.
Yes.
So you're saying co-location with Place Maillard?
Co-location or this thing standalone next to them.
Things that you've highlighted in your report, so I can make this very succinct, is that the Government of Canada announced this Canadian Cultural Spaces Fund. Mm-hmm. Is it $15 million per project?
It depends. I brought the document here. It's called
okay.
culture.
It looks like there's a space. So I didn't know if it was 1.5 or 15 million.
It can go up to 50% of what the cost of a facility would be, and could be higher depending if it does the help out official language communities.
Okay, so my question is, do you have to have plans drawn, etc., which you would have to talk to our staff about first before you apply, or have you applied and put a placemaker in from Maillardville, or can you do that?
I cannot apply unless I get the support of the city. There's no doubt about that.
But so if we said yes, go for it, can you do it without plans and all that stuff?
No, you have to have plans for anything.
So
you
that's my
request
question.
funding.
I'm trying to figure out where we are in the process.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Mayor Stewart.
I thank you very much on behalf of Council. Merci à toute la communauté francophone. It is a vitally important community, and I appreciate that your report actually appreciates the challenges that have been here. Now, how do we get to where we're going? I have the same question related to the potential for 50% up to 15 million, but I also wanted to explore a little bit, very quickly, the preference between standalone and co-location, or rather joint facility. I guess co-location being an option of having elements of a facility be shared, as well as elements of a facility that are private to Societe and private to some other organization.
For us, I think in order to have a distinctive reality, it'd be a standalone building. I think in speaking with my colleagues at Place Maillardville, we met again last week with Bill. Of course, their needs, they have to meet their needs before they meet anybody else's needs. So I don't know, I'm not aware of all the needs they have and what's the size of the building. I'm not aware of nothing about Place Maillardville. I haven't been informed of nothing. So me, in speaking with our board, what we were hoping, and in talking with the people who prepared the assessment for us also, was they felt that they should encourage, it should be encouraged that a building that could be adjacent to, like I said when we first met in September last year, would be an adjacent building where the signage would give us a real face on the street. So that would be the ideal reality. But I think it's important that we don't get lost into another building like we were before. You know, that's what happened. We became, invisible. So we need to really become a visible reality in order for people to continue and people to want to use our services. So that's, all in all, that's the answer I could give you to that. I think a distinctive building would be of great, but, beggars are not choosers, as they say. So.
And I thank you very much for the report. I think it's going to be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Zerillo.
Oh, thank you for coming in. I just had a question about involvement in Place Maillard. You know that Place Maillard is in planning stages right now.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, how has SFM been involved with the city in planning and having input to new Place Maillard? How has that transpired?
I've not been involved at all. Not at all. So whatever plans they're moving, I don't know, with discussions, we're not aware at all of how and where it would go. I never felt that I was privileged to get that type of information either. I don't have that reality, but I did, like I said, we did meet again last week, Bill Boone and his new executive director and myself and my president, Richard. And it's like I said, when we talked about space, Bill, because when we met many months ago, there was never a return on what we were proposing to do to have adjacent space, and I knew that, there's space that they've allocated already to all their programming. So by asking this adjacent building, we're not trespassing on anybody's dreams or whatever, but they never did return to us to even tell us. And, I understand they're busy with their own stuff, but I've never been invited to any discussions at all.
So if you don't mind, I just wanted to ask staff a question about that. So I think before I do, so this is the Place Maillard board that you've been meeting with and speaking with when you say Bill?
When we yes, the president of
So I guess I just
Maillardville.
wanted to understand from staff, so are we expecting SFM's input through the Place Maillard board, or are we going to be speaking with them directly?
Mr.
about-
Alweba.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our staff has had discussions with Societe Francophone, although the period by which we've been reviewing this facility, the replacement of Place Maillard, has been a few months here. So there's been some discussion, perhaps in the last couple of weeks. We haven't, but we have spoken to their group. We've been in discussions closely as well with the Place Maillard board, but it is in early stages right now, and there's some, very high-level feasibility work that's happening right now, and a lot of the details we're just kind of forming the bigger plan, which is and we do have an understanding that the society is looking for space. There was a question around how their aspirations. We're looking to try and develop some planning around the future Place Maillard, with the possibility that there's space available or there's an alternate scheme that council might be interested in. But at this point, it's very early. There have been discussions with all the groups, but it's not at the point where we're presenting a potential feasibility out in the public, which is why it's still been somewhat amorphous, but it's early on in the facility planning project.
So could I ask then, I'm not sure if there's an advisory group or how it's working, but can we be sure as a city that we're including, even though they're not necessarily going to go in Place Maillard, that
Absolutely, we are. There will be, once we have a better understanding where we're going to go with the replacement of that facility, there'll be, in terms of the site and potential space availability, and the range of space will be discussed, and what's in that potential facility. Then be a detailed discussion, again, with all the groups, including Societe Francophone and the Place Maillardville board that will be responsible for running the facility.
Okay. So I'm not advocating for or not to have a co-location space, but there was some things that you mentioned today that was important, and it's the idea that the actual physical space. I know when I first moved here, I visited there almost immediately, coming from a French province, and it is actually a gateway into the city. It's how I got connected to the city going forward, was to go to that one space. So I just want to put it out there that I certainly don't want to be on council in the time when we might lose the sustainability and the preservation of the French culture in Maillardville, no matter how big or small. And I just hope that we're including SFM in all of our conversations around what's happening down there. Thank you for
If I
coming.
may, the last time we had discussions with city staff was in the summer of 2016. Those were the last meetings.
That's it?
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Approximately how much space do you figure you're going to need?
That was part of Ruben's stuff. This is Ruben Guindin. He's our board member. We were expecting anywhere between 5,000 to 6,000 square feet that would be required to really fully serve our community. And the community is not just the Francophones, you know that, Councillor Wilson. I mean, it is the Francophiles also. It's the people that just have an interest and passion for doing something in French.
Okay. Is that it? Joanne, thank you very much for your presentation.
Yep.
Thank
Merci.
you.
Merci beaucoup. All right.
Item 2, our second delegation, pertains to Oakdale zoning, and we have 3 individuals who have applied to follow up on this item in the aftermath of the Coquitlam neighborhood plan.
Okay. Come forward. Thank you. I'm Councillor Asmus. I'm chairing this meeting. You'll have 5 minutes for your presentation as previous the last presentations. All presentations are for 5 minutes. So I'll let you know when you're at your 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Your Worship, council members, my name is Paul Olenek. We represent a majority of the residents of South Oakdale, and we would like to start out by saying that we appreciate the work you've done in the Coquitlam neighborhood plan. We fully support it. We would also like to thank Councilman Dennis Marsden for reaching out to us this weekend. He provided much-needed feedback and context ahead of this meeting, so we appreciate that very much. And I would also like to apologize to Mayor and Council if they misinterpreted my letter to suggest that there was collusion between the city and developers. That was not my intent. The area that we're speaking about, sorry, this piece right in,
Like across the bottom.
right here.
Yep.
Our petition area goes right here, all the way down to Como Lake.
To Kemsley or Wesley?
West.
Just Wesley?
To west.
Okay, thank you.
There. And what we've done is we've got 72% of the residents in here are in favor of density.
You can use there's a pointer on the...
Sorry.
to show how
72% in the area I just showed you, and 62% overall, which kind of matches up with your planning department is talking about.
You're like a bit closer, please.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
So what? Better?
Yep, better, much better. Thank you.
Okay. What? We started this all off when you were developing the neighborhood plan. We had some questions and we disagreed with some parts of it. This being the this transit area, which actually the line kind of cuts right across here, so it's within the 400 meters. So this is like ground zero in terms of your 400-meter first circle. So we thought that there was a priority to have this part done. So we went out, we got our petitions, we spent literally hundreds of hours garnering support for this transit area densification. And, but unfortunately to date we have no formal feedback from City Hall. We don't know what you're thinking, we do know that your planner, I can't remember what his name was.
Romero?
No, it was, he was quoted in the paper, Jim McIntyre, saying that there was, that it was basically a no-go zone because of the opposition to it. And our petition alone says 63% are in favor and there's 20% opposed to it. So we were, basically that's the only information that we've got from the city, is just what we read in the Tri-City News. So really we'd like you to give us some direction. And the only other point that we would like to make is
I just want, on the point with Mr. McIntyre, Mr. McIntyre was talking about the whole Oakdale area. So when we're talking about, when he's responding to the paper, he's not responding, we take areas from Oakdale's.
Point of order. I think he's allowed to finish his presentation before he's being corrected on his opinion.
No.
You don't mind?
I don't mind.
Go ahead.
Sorry. So, as the only other point that I wanted to make was that we're in solid support of this, and we would like to work with the city. So, if there's anything we can do to help you folks out, we'd be willing to work with you, but sit on committees or do whatever. But we'd like to see this happen. And in terms of the planning, for example, this park right here.
There we go.
Oh, see it up there? Okay.
Yeah.
This park down here, we've got I really don't see the need for an expansion of that park because typically hardly anyone uses it. I see a mother and some kids on the swings there, and during the wintertime, the kids take toboggans down the hill. But if you expand the park, you're not going to increase the use of it because 300 feet up the road, there's the,
Your 5 minutes. Continue though.
there's 300 feet up the hill, there's a Burnaby Mountain. And hundreds of people use that thing for mountain biking, for hiking, for dog walking, everything. So to expand a park that close to another park just doesn't seem to make any sense. And the people right along Jefferson on the back, there's a riparian setback that they're talking about, which effectively cuts their properties in half. I think if we worked with the planning department to rezone those as townhouse units and put the setback up closer to the road, they would still retain some of the value to their property if that was ever to be developed. So there's a whole bunch of little things that if the planning department was instructed to continue working on this, we'd like to work alongside them on it.
Anything else?
Hello?
Your Worship, Council, members of the Planning Committee, we understand that the opponents wanted the rezoning delayed for future study, but our issue too is that all of the news and everything we read in the papers is how important it is to develop things around SkyTrain. I'm speaking to the situation facing the owners of the 5 properties, myself included, that are now designated as parkland. And in June 2016, I met with Andrew and was told that our properties, although we were now going to be RS1 now and in the future, the value would be compensated somewhat at least because the rest of it was going to be zoned, the rest of the properties around would be zoned as townhouse or medium density. So the park has gone forward, which I'm all for. but the rest of the zoning has stated RS1. Now, the people who are affected probably the most are 500 and 504 Jefferson, who had already approached the city about the possibility of subdividing or townhouse development, because those two lots are huge. There's 4 houses across the street from them, so that would be like one whole block is just those 2 properties. And they were told no, wasn't going to happen because already that was in the city plan. So those people are now RS1, huge properties, cannot subdivide now or in the future. So we just ask council to reconsider or direct the planning committee to reconsider the density around the SkyTrain.
Okay, I'll let you guys go over. To be corrected, I'd let you go over about 3 minutes more. I've got myself, I got Councillor Neal and myself. Councillor Neal.
Okay, thank you. So we've heard loud and clear from residents of the southern part of the Oakdale neighborhood that they are welcome to, open to having more density there. Indeed, when we were having our public hearing on the issue of adopting the entire Coquitlam Lougheed neighborhood plan, I think many of us were certainly we heard that, and we asked staff at the time to what could be done to answer some of that. So we did get a statement from staff at the time that was in public, and I would ask perhaps Mr. McIntyre now if he could reiterate what he heard from council in terms of after the public hearing when we were voting on the adoption of the plan, and what his plans are now to take into account council direction and the obvious strong desire from the residents of the southern part of Oakdale to densify. Mr. McIntyre.
Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon. Yeah, there was discussion at the public hearing, as there has been in a number of meetings leading up to that. This group of residents aren't the only ones in the plan area that want to advance the history or the future of their properties in their area. In being aware of that, Andrew Merrill was leading the team on the Coquitlam Lougheed neighborhood plan, had built into the draft plan document a number of mechanisms or triggers to enable that plan review to come back. On the basis of a petition, the direction of council, if a developer came in and assembled some lands, those would be the sort of triggers that would cause us to go back and revisit that area in the recently adopted neighborhood plan. There was another one too that was further north. Council maybe recall on the east side of Clark. It's an area I think had initially been neighborhood attached residential or housing choices, and there was a strong interest in that area. Significant numbers came out asking for a townhouse designation. At that point, I think we council and committee took note of that, and our staff took note of that. And what we offered then is to look at that, because we're getting into a housing choices review, and that would be a housing choices area that might be subject for that type of review next year. We're not opposed to doing this. It's just that the neighborhood plan was a lengthy process. There was a number of neighborhood pockets that came up through that process, and I think the interest was to get the plan done, recognizing it's not 100%, and there's these triggers to come back and revisit areas. Staff are willing to do that. It's just that would have to be balanced against other work program priorities. It's something that have to be factored into our business plan for 2018.
So is it your judgment then that the triggers have been pulled for South Oakdale, and that it's just a matter of resource and timing now, that there isn't sufficient, you've heard sufficiently that it is going to be an early project. We've just done the big Coquitlam Lougheed, but now we've certainly heard the public hearing, we're hearing now. Has the trigger been pulled? Yes or no?
Through the chair, I would say almost, not quite. There's a delegation here this afternoon. I think we'd have to follow that with something a little more formal. Staff would want to look at that and then report back to council.
So will you be following up with this delegation, or should they be following up with you? What's the process then for them to go forward?
Well, I think they're here to get council's feedback today. Certainly staff would benefit from that. And if there's a formal request from this group to the Planning Development Department, we would look at that and bring that report back to council.
Okay.
Mr. Sepple?
As council is aware, we have more planning initiatives on our work plate than we can get through. So what we would be looking for from council is at least an initial approval in principle for at least looking at it. Are you amenable to reopening this area and for staff to be starting to formally put it on the work program? We still would have to put it on the work program and bring it forward. But as you know, we have many areas that are looking for our planning department to focus on, and we do not have enough staff to do them all. So we would be looking for some indication from you, not on today or some other day, how high a priority to use this. Because right now, it's out there. We know there's interest, but right now it is not on staff's work program.
And my response to that would be, I agree that it's some more formal direction would be useful. I don't think we need to get into that now. We've got a huge agenda today that we need to get through, but this should be something that we can bring up. I don't know if it gets brought up by council later in the summer or in the early fall. What would be the preference to? Would you put it on the agenda for us, Mr. McIntyre, or should we bring it up as a council-directed initiative for us to have some time to discuss this?
Through the chair, if I could. It's timely that we are, staff are in the early stages of formulating our proposed 2018 business plan, and that's something we'll be coming forward to council in the fall, typically as part of the annual budget process and package. And so I think that at that time, it would give council that ability to see the full ask. You know, what's the full spectrum of projects? What all is on the go? And what are those priorities, as opposed to sort of cherry-picking one and advancing that at the expense of others.
So you'll put that on the list for us to choose from. Okay, so we don't have to initiate. Thank you. That sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your presentation, sir. I think there's some other people that had questions before you leave.
Okay. Just here, Mr. McIntyre, is that what you're talking about, the amending formula, or are you looking at bringing up the review of the Oakdale area as a whole? Is this strictly what you're talking about, is asking these people to move into what's part of the program, the amending formula, for a portion of that area, or is this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I would suggest, once the meeting's over today, I wouldn't mind for Andrew and I meeting with Mr. Nolnick and his neighbors and get a little better understanding of where they're at, and we can talk about the steps going forward. And what I would suggest is it would be an item to consider as part of the 2018 work program, business plan program.
Business plan program, because I guess I just want to make sure that as we move this forward, we have the other groups that have come forward. And when we passed the plan, we talked about to the other groups saying, well, you can apply for an amending through the amending formula, right? So I think we want to make sure as we go through your group, sir, or a couple other groups, there's at least two other groups that have come set forward, which is unusual. Most of the time when we do think people don't want density, we're having people come and say, no, we want more density, which is unusual, which is good in my mind. But we've got other areas, so we have to balance out those issues in those areas also. So, Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just very briefly, and I certainly appreciate the group coming forward and getting the numbers out in that area. And I know there was mention of a quote I made in the paper, but we were looking at the full Oakdale sub-area, which kind of just a convenient geographic area, everything west of Clark, north of Como Lake. And I think clearly through the plan process, there has been groups that have sort of congealed and come together in different areas. So my comments are around the whole Oakdale area.
Okay. My next speaker is Mayor Stewart.
Thank you for coming. As was explained, I personally spoken to people in your neighborhood, just off Como Lake, that a year ago absolutely were adamantly opposed to any development. So I understand we're not making up individuals, and we recognize that you've now gone door to door, and I accept your numbers, that the majority of the people you've been able to speak to are supportive of it, and that's the challenge, is we have to go on the basis of what feedback we get.
Right.
You know, there were those of us on council who were pushing. So we will be re-examining this. I'm not sure how quickly, but I thank you very much for coming in and expressing once again the support that there is for higher densities in that neighborhood. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Councillor Reid.
The mayor just perhaps said verbatim what I'm going to say. You're going to meet with Mr. McIntyre, which is a great way to begin to relook at this. Okay. But I remember when we first started, Oakdale was sort of a priority because it was right on the edge of the city, and why not start at the edge and move forward? And there was a huge backlash at council on that. So things have changed. Lots of things have changed, and they're going to change some more. So I think we'll just work it through and see where we can put it on the work plan and work from there. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item, please. Yep.
Next item, item 3, concerns issues related to solid waste management bylaw number 4679. I'd like to invite Mr. Michael Zazkis to come forward, who's here as a delegation on this topic.
Welcome. Thank you. Just reminds everybody else you have 5 minutes for your presentation.
Yes, I'm pretty much aware of that. Although I had to develop some technique to address most of the things, but I'll have to skip a few things.
Okay.
First of all, before I begin, I would like to thank Mayor and Council by bringing City of Coquitlam waste management to 21st century. There is no more plastic bags, there is no flinky containers, there is no people running out of the truck and tripping. This is actually what was we all hopeful, and I think it's me personally, you guys have my deepest appreciation and respect. Now, actually, it's tomorrow, July 18, 1 year. Let me just put my glasses because it's actually 1 year anniversary of introduction by Law 4679, milestone achievement by Law 4679 became law of the land, and its one and only purpose was to address concern over wildlife being drawn into residential area. All of us, council, mayor, gave full support, rightfully so. Yes, year passed, and I believe it's time to reflect, examine cost, benefits, achievements, public use then and now, analyze, to re-examine, and decide what to do next. This is what I believe elected officials do. My personal view, I'm not on a regular basis review those things, but what's brought my attention was article in Tri-City dated August 13 and then October 6. And after 24 years as a resident of Coquitlam, we received our first violation note for the violation that occurred 2 months prior. And then I learned that we became officially Black Bear Sighting Capital of BC, and then Bear Smart Community of BC. In addition, I review few informations after few phone conversations with city employees and then correspondence with city officials, city financial report of 2016 and 2017 to 21 projections, and city recent citizen survey. I would like to bring attention that to this article in Tri-City, on the very bottom it says, since the beginning of the year, Coquitlam has issued about 1,400 warnings and 225 tickets. Subject to it's not fake news. My rough estimation, City of Coquitlam spent somewhere between 2,000 to 3,000 man hours just to enforce that. Now, then I will skip to page 12 of projection 2017 and 21, that indicating that amount of complaints Yes, I know all of them related to the garbage collection, and some of them it's business relation. It's doubled since 2015. In addition to that, there is a survey on page 19. Sorry, may I just go back to page 51 of the same projection, which indicated that almost 21,000 of bylaw enforcement notices was issued in 2016. If my calculation is correct, we have 139,000 population. It's about 50,000 households. So every second household received violation ticket. Maybe I'm wrong a little bit in my calculation, but this is what's come to my mind. And then I looked at the survey, which indicated that recent quality of life has improved, and there is 5% improvement because of garbage services. And on the other hand, on page 19, there is the reason why quality of life is going to worsen, and there is 9% says it's because of city management. Nor that I'm involved in any management decision. I'm just bringing the fact in front of the city council and the mayor. And then, in some accidental way, I found that while Incon mayor signature on bylaw 46 was still wet, army of city employers were cruising in the street of the Coquitlam and issuing warning letters and violation notes to the unaware to the bylaw 46 changes in the city of Coquitlam residents. And to explain those, it's actually to some degree, it's also explained the facts in a newspaper article. And then I ask myself, so what we are learning from that? From this 1,400 violation warnings and 225 tickets. And then I did some more digging and some more facts, and I asked myself one question: are we on the right track? I have about 13 or 14 items. I'll go through a few of them, and then if time will permit, I will go back.
Michael? You're at the 5 minutes. I'll give you another minute or so to wrap up to your points, please.
Yes, I will go right to the point. Final, after 12 months since July 18, I think...
Papers against the microphone.
Oh, sorry. I'm not used to that.
No, don't worry.
Okay. I think it's after 12 months since July 18, I think it's about time to have to conduct targeted survey, specifically how residents view those changes, and secondary to get some data. And I believe once cost-related data is available, if survey is conducted, you guys as officials will get some information regarding environmental and wildlife impact, if occur any. Then you will be able to decide if we are on the right track, or I'm just simple guy that have some funny feelings that we are not on the right track.
Okay. I have questions. Mayor Stewart.
Thank you very much for coming in. You cited some numbers that suggested that 1 in 2 residents had received a ticket.
Yes. I can go back to my calculation.
Okay. And then you said there was some 300 tickets issued.
No, I said, Mayor, if I may say, it was 20,687 tickets were issued in 2016. I'm talking about page number 51 of the report. And it's bylaw enforcement notices.
Okay, those are notices. They're not tickets. They're warnings.
No, to the best of my understanding, there is warrants and there is violation tickets, or violation notice.
Okay, so you think there are 20,000 tickets issued?
I read what I see in front of me, Mayor. With all due respect, I can't interpret it in any other way.
Yeah, I wonder if we could ask staff. That might help us.
Good afternoon, Council, and through the Chair. That number, it appears to come from perhaps the city's annual report. Citywide, for all bylaw offences, the number is in the 20,000 range. So that, of course, includes parking tickets, that includes animal tickets, that includes tickets of all nature across the city, all enforcement groups.
And the animal, or rather the garbage-related tickets was...
I'm afraid I don't have that number offhand, but perhaps the issuing division
he
might...
cited 300 or something at one point in the report.
It was 1,400 and 225 to be precise. And I'm not. This is from Tri-City.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I was trying to understand your number about tickets. You do know that when people get parking tickets, they may well be from Port Coquitlam, because I've received a parking ticket in New Westminster once, so I'm in their records.
I didn't imply that all of those 20,000 are related to the garbage. What I said...
That's all I understood. Yeah. So I cleared that up.
Okay.
Mayor Stewart, I believe during 2016 we issued just over 200 tickets for bear-related violation for solid waste.
Yeah, so the vast majority of written citations, if you will, have been warnings, not tickets.
Oh, definitely, yes. And even that was a much lower number than 20,000.
Okay, I just wanted to clear that up. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. So it's interesting. So you're here today to tell me what? That I'm doing the Bear Aware program all wrong? Or you have some ideas that you'd like to share with us?
Yes, I will. Definitely, if you allow, I would like to share with you.
That's not up to me to do that, and we're not the right place. We have experts. We hire the technicians that do that. But you mentioned something that I want to address. And that is that you said it's 2,000 to 3,000 man-hours, and maybe it is. And if we took even a simple $50 an hour, it's $150,000. So what's your child's life worth?
What, my what?
What's your child's life worth? What's any citizen in this city's life worth? We've got to do something. And so when you say we use all these man-hours, we do. And is it a choice we make to? No, it's something we feel we have to do. This is real serious stuff. And last week, the mayor and I, staff put on a whole process bringing wildlife people in to explain, I love to see the little bears. I love a bear hug. Maybe not so much when I take a look at some of these guys. This weekend, we got someone just terrified because they're right at the front door. Mm-hmm. If you don't want us to spend 2,000 to 3,000 man-hours, then every person in the city that puts out garbage has to spend 15 minutes doing it.
First of all, I'm a person of law, and I believe in law, and we have to all obey. But my view on those 1,400 or 2,000 hours, which I said, could be spent way smarter. I'm not talking about to inform the people about the change of the law, but what I'm trying to say, if it's the same person that writing this warning ticket will see light in the door of Michael Zazkis, go 2 seconds downstairs, knock on the door and say, Mr. Zazkis, you violated the law 4679. What will possibly reason you have to do that? And then if this person will collect some basic data and bring it to you, to the council, and say, hey, I found out there is 15 out of 20 had meeting in Seattle. They couldn't do that. So what we as city have to offer to them? What's alternative besides a violation of the law? If somebody will come and answer the door, say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I was not aware. I will be more obedient next time," then we reach our goal. We are educated. We change behavior of the citizen. This is what was this law all about. But without knowing what was the reason for those 1,400 or another tickets, so we kind of going in the dark and looking for this explanation, and we don't know. Maybe you know, I don't.
No, well, maybe people live in a bubble, but the bubble's going to get burst one day if they come home and get a big bear hug. I think people have to realize that for the last 2 or 3 years, we've been on a process that we have used every newspaper. Our communications department, which is excellent, uses every form of communication to get the message out. If you think we spend 2,000 or 3,000 man-hours now, if I had to stop and talk to you and talk to your neighbor and talk to that one, we'd be spending 20,000 man-hours a year doing this. There's personal responsibility too. This is so serious. It's so serious. I don't want to have somebody killed. And so if you have great ideas, I think share them with us. We'll be glad.
Yeah.
Write us a note. Let us know. But when we have a process that we've spent so much time and energy on trying to make it work, I have difficulty getting criticized for something that I don't think people take as serious as it is. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Actually, I'm okay.
Okay.
I had a similar question, or similar thoughts.
Mayor Stewart.
Yeah, and I'm going to very quickly, I've been asked, I've been told by staff that the reason they don't get out of their cars at midnight to knock on your door or at 9 p.m. to knock on your door is for the safety of staff. These are staff that are individuals in their vehicles. They make note of facts from the night before, for example, or in the early hours. But if we're dealing with the possibility that bears have been attracted into the neighborhood, I'd rather our staff not be wandering through there to discover whether any bears discovered this place yet. So I thank you for that, though, and if you do have some of those other suggestions, please do put them in an email to us, and we'll have a look at them. We look at every piece of advice that we can get from around the world because we want to do the best job possible to protect our residents from bears and to protect bears from the reality that faces them if we don't protect our residents from bears. I thank you for coming in.
Thank you very much. Was it your pen? Oh, yeah. Next item, please.
Thank you. Next item is the minutes of this committee's meeting of Monday, July 10th. Recommendation to approve.
Votes.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next, please.
Next item, item 5, is our first report of staff. It concerns a retaining wall review for sloping sites in Partington Creek. We have introductory comments by the General Manager of Planning and Development. Reports before you for information.
Welcome. Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon again, committee members. Just a few opening remarks from my perspective, and Bruce is here with me today to respond to any detailed questions on this report. As the Burke Mountain community has continued to grow and develop up the mountain and across to the east, we're encountering steeper sloped areas, clearly. And due to a variety of factors, with the intention of achieving safe, marketable development on these steeply sloping sites, particularly for single family, there's been frequently the solution is to go to extensive and fairly high retaining walls. And so in some areas these retaining walls are quite obvious and significant in height. And going up there on occasion and having a look at these new neighborhoods that we're planning and developing, I often think back in my own neighborhood, that's the hill and the plateau, and I get out often and walk around in a hillside community and try to draw some comparisons. But one thing that is clear to me is that if we are to develop on these hillside areas in Coquitlam, it's within the urban containment boundary, it's above the floodplain, it's outside the LR. One of the physical realities is that there's going to be a need for regrading and for retaining. And so I think it's a matter of recognizing that, but how do we address that? There are drawbacks, clearly, with extensive and overly high retaining walls. First, there's the obvious visible one, and we've got some reaction to that. But also, there's some practical challenges to retaining walls, and something as basic as providing services to some of these lots. We're on a sloping site. To drain those lots, you got to run pipes out the back, and that can cause issues for our operations people over time. But also, too, there's a question about the long-term sustainability, the ownership and the maintenance of these walls. And we see this on occasion, maybe more over the southwest now, with some of the retaining walls that have started to fail or need to be replaced. So we've got to be mindful of that. We don't want to be creating tomorrow's problems. But back to Partington Creek. The issue has been raised around the wall height, and we question the need for those, and obviously there's been concern expressed by council, and staff have heard that. So we initiated a review. There was a project team was formed. It's led by George Fuji, our Director of Development Services, but also alongside him was Bruce Irving, who was able to get in and do some of the analysis and consultation. Through that review, and there was a fair degree of discussion and input from some of the key developers, and so we've worked up a bit of a draft of an approach, a game plan that we'd like to proceed with, but we thought we'd check in with council today. You may have some questions around that. We can respond. And I guess sort of seeking your support for proceeding with preparing some guidelines for development on sloping sites. In the work to date, we've identified a number of possible solutions, or I think in combination these measures would help in dealing with this matter. There's engineering solutions, and in that we got a lot of discussion and input from our engineering staff. But also there's other solutions as well around land use. Certain land uses, and I mean types of residential development. More multifamily versus single family can often help in dealing with steeper sites. And then lastly is just the building typology too. We need to think about how we're designing our homes, these homes. If we're going to be creating single family neighborhoods, the homes have to respect and work with that site. And so that's a realization as well. So it's our feeling that with a policy to deal with the development on these sloping sites that takes into account those various measures or tools, we can come up with an approach that will hopefully see lesser and lower retaining walls over time. I won't go into all the details of what the proposed program would entail. Again, Bruce can better answer that. But what we're looking for is feedback today. If you have any questions, we try to respond. And looking for your support in us carrying forward and preparing these policies and these design guidelines for sloping sites.
Thank you, Mr. McIntyre. We have questions. I'll start with Councillor Reid.
Okay, I'll be quick and I'll be scattered through the report. I'm glad to see that you've put different housing choices in, because I think there are housing choices out there, as we've discussed, that could maybe work. I think it's time that we looked at the fact that some of the land may be undevelopable. And I think that's one of the realities that we may have to come to, as well as the other folks up there. My concerns are liability to the city and safety for the residents, as are yours. And I see rainwater as one of our biggest challenges, which comes to climate change, which I never thought I'd hear myself saying all this stuff, but I really do believe. I got a pat from the left, yes. I did that for Terry so he could appreciate that it was actually from the left. Anyhow,
we have the right.
I'm concerned about water because I am hoping that the things that we looked at 20, 15 years ago, all the retaining ponds and all those things are working as they're supposed to. We now have Joseph on board, and I'm just I just really want to make sure everything is working as it's supposed to, because I listen to the residents up there and they're telling me about how devastating some of this rain can be, especially when we get very dry and then all of a sudden we get just this massive rainfall. So that's my biggest concern with the walls, is who's going to build them and how are we going to have extra engineers in to make sure that they're done right, and not just let a builder come in and say, oh yeah, my grandfather and I built retaining walls for 50 years. I don't want one of those. I want a guy that really knows what he's doing, and I think we should have appropriate staff that may have to back that up, and we may have to have some kind of a permitting system for that. That's the one thing. You mentioned, and height. Boy, 10 to 12 foot retaining walls, 3 meters or whatever they may be, that's still pretty high for me. Unless it's built right in as part of the basement in a house. That I can get, and that I can live with. When you talk about, these are suggestions now to what you've got, ownership, you're talking about strata and long-term maintenance and that. That's sort of like where you've put all our buildings now that have been around for 20 years, and you're putting us all into the strata long-term maintenance of all the interior courtyards over the podiums. A big issue now, millions of dollars for stratas. And so we would have to have, especially if we go into like row houses or townhouses and things like that, or the ones where they aren't full strata, but they are sort of bare land strata, part strata, and you're putting agreements in, party wall agreements and that. I think we're going to have to get a little more busy with things that would work if we're going to try and use that as a way to deal with retention and, or I should say, taking care of the the walls. Other than that, I think you're right where we should be going. So to put it in a nutshell, 35%, yeah, I don't know what you build on it. You did not mention the BC Building Code. You say they professional engineering standards. Does the BC Building Code have a detailed percentage? Like you say, the city, the zoning bylaw is over 35%. Is that the BC Building Code percentage?
Not sure, Jim.
It doesn't matter if you're not sure. I'm just wondering if they did have one.
Yes, to the chair. It's interesting. It's sort of a combination of rules and regulations come into place. The 35%, that's a city zoning bylaw maximum. The BC Building Code, it too has requirements when you get into a retaining wall. If you're going to build a retaining wall above a certain height, it needs to meet certain standards. We have ways of dealing with that, but also what we found, a little bit of a explanation or a bit of a policy gap, I guess is what we refer to it, is that they can also be built through a subdivision process. So they're engineered, they're reviewed and approved, but it's above and beyond the building code or zoning bylaw because it's done through the subdivision process. So this is where we see as one opportunity to bring things together so it's got some consistency.
Okay, and the last thing, rear yard servicing. If we're going to have to do that and it gets more expensive, maybe then we're going to have area-specific charges in those areas if we're going to have back lane pickup. And those are my comments. As to the developers and builders wanting a whole bunch of single-family houses and flat lots, we have more property in Coquitlam than just Burke Mountain that they can build single-family houses on flat lots. This is a mountain, and they should expect to build for a mountain. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, thanks. I'm generally in support of the direction you're going. I think it's needed up there. There's some extremely high walls there, and we want to make sure they get smaller. I'm interested in if indeed one of the main responses to this is to have different housing forms, townhouses, stepping down the land and everything like that. That means more density, and that means therefore, I would think it means more density than a big single-family house. I would think it therefore means more people, greater population growth. And I'm wondering where that would put us now for the whole Burke Mountain. I know that our website says that the whole entire northeast Coquitlam area plan sees a population increase of 24,000 to 30,000. The latest Tri-City News says that the Northwest vision that we've been talking about and is on our agenda could add up to 11,000 on top of the 25,000 in other neighborhoods. That's 36,000. So maybe maybe that figure that I talked about to begin with, 24 to 30, is an older one that didn't take into account some of the density that extra density we've been putting in some of the lower neighborhoods. So if we add extra density to the upper part of the Partington Creek area now, what are we looking at overall now for population? How many more people? What are our latest estimates? Maybe you can't estimate this one yet, but what are the latest estimates that we know that's even more people going up there? And like most people on council, I've got no problem with the density because well, there's some problems with it, but generally they're more affordable, and that's what people want. So where are we at with population?
Through the chair, I think the question sort of divides into two elements. In terms of our overall NECAP and Northwest Burke estimates, we do regularly update that within the regional growth context. We are required to provide updates, which we do at, I believe it's year end, when we review that, and we can share those on a regular basis with council. Specific to retaining walls, what we're finding is changes within the single-family form that we're zoned for, which are RS7, RS8, RS9, moving up to townhouses. Some of the townhouses that we'd be dealing with do increase density somewhat, but we're also trying to accommodate a lot of slope. So specifically from the retaining wall issues, at this time it's a little early to predict, but just using the sample ones we've done, it's very incremental in not really driving density itself. That being said, Mr. McIntyre may want to comment on how we do our larger estimates and how often we update them.
Yeah, if I could, Mr. Chair. Planning is a science, but also a little bit of an art, especially when you come to the neighborhood planning. There's ranges that are identified, and I take some solace in that sort of the range that we have on the planning side, I think, is equally matched by the range that the engineers build into their infrastructure system. There's quite a buffer there in terms of being able to accommodate either, hopefully not less, but more population. So it's not precise, but the key point is to track that over time. The housing types, I think it's a fair question. Though I think what we're seeing, particularly in the other single-family neighborhoods on Burke Mountain, particularly the RS7, RS8s, the primary unit, and there's a lot of secondary suites. So I think the number of people living in that building is I think a higher number. Typically the efficiency for townhouses is roughly double what you get with single-family. By and large, and so we don't have secondary suites in too many townhouses, so it might be fairly close.
That way, then.
Pretty close. I think there'll be maybe a net overall gain because you get with townhouses, you'd probably get a little more efficiency in terms of the number of units.
Okay, that's just back to the broader question then. Have we properly accounted for in our projections all the people who are in secondary suites up there? Have we done that? Does the 24,000 to 30,000 K projection deal with that, or does the 25K plus 11K that the Tri-City News just reported, is that looking at 40%, 60% having secondary suites or whatever? Where are we there?
Bruce can help me with this one too, given his community planning background, but it's an iterative process. Certainly we get into the neighborhood planning stage, we try to make some assumptions around household sizes based on unit type, and then add a factor for secondary suites. Over time, though, we like to check that against what the actual census data is that's coming forward, so just to sort of back check, if you will, and make sure we're tracking in the right direction.
So we're going to be getting neighborhood data, data shortly, aren't we?
Yes, there's more information that's coming out this year, and we do track that, but maybe Bruce, you know more on that.
It'd be good to know then what the actual population now is on Brook Mountain compared to what it should have been under our projections. And then we could perhaps start extrapolating that to understand how many people are living up there.
Thank you. And through the chair, for members who've served on council for some time, you'll remember that there were some communities we used to count lot by lot, and that actually created some rather challenges with certain individuals. But that being said, that trained us to start counting very closely what we estimated up there. We still do that, and I think the councillor raises a great point. I don't recall that in recent memory we've brought forward projection numbers and aligned them to where our policy is. I think that's something we could easily do because we are tracking those numbers, and it probably is time for us to bring that forward to council as an information item in the future.
You know, it's something that we might even talk about tonight.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
I'm comfortable with what the suggestions are in the report and looking forward to continuing to work on it. But my questions are, how did this happen? You know, in the background information, it says during the development of the plan, methods to address the steep slope development were explored. It was recognized that the steeper grades may require more rigorous treatment relative to other sites. Yada, yada, yada. Subsequently, guidelines for multifamily homes were adopted. However, single-family guidelines were excluded. That stakeholder consultation indicated that past practices had adequately addressed steeper slopes elsewhere on Burke Mountain, and additional policies seem premature. So we know there was a problem. We decided not to address it in the neighborhood plan. We did it for multifamily, or you have done it for multifamily, but not single-family. And so, as these massive retaining walls were being proposed, like should council have been told, hey, this is an issue that we're going to have to deal with? Because I've been up there and I've seen them, and they're massive, right? And they're imposing. They scare the hell out of me. And maybe I have no reason to be scared, but similar concerns as Councillor Reid in terms of long-term maintenance, and so how did we get to this point?
Through the chair, within the development of the Partington Creek Master Plan, we were cognizant of the slopes that were coming through. Those slopes, as were mentioned by previous council, were very much cognizant as well of the water that was on the hill and what we were trying to accomplish. At that time, through stakeholder consultation and with a discussion with council did ask us to examine various forms of steep slope development guidelines. They were proposed. They were tested with our stakeholders. There was not at that time an appetite to apply those to single family. A very strong logic from many of our development groups, including our own internal one, would point out that we've been developing on the mountain for years and we haven't had that problem. So why apply a policy when there hasn't yet been a problem? Looking back on it, we recognize that there is what we call, or Jim identified as, a policy gap. We specifically make exclusions to retaining wall heights for single-family homes brought through as part of a large subdivision. So when they come through that particular window, there really isn't guidance at this time on any staff on what to do. We would usually put that guidance inside our neighborhood plans. The Partington Creek one has that for multifamilies. It requires that multifamily and commercial units go through that review process, but we do specifically in our current bylaw exempt single family. We believe that if council so directs, we can correct that. We also believe that, I would say, an advance from some of the 2012 thinking that we brought forward in the Partington piece. I actually think some of the work we're doing now with retaining walls is much more logical. I think some of the stuff that was proposed in 2012 really didn't look as much as the viability side of the equation, where we've had a much more robust conversation right now with developers to try to say where is a better balance. So I think some of the things that we're looking at, which we're applying to what are called the lands ready for development in this report, are a more practical application than some of the academic-driven sort of things that were coming around in 2012 that didn't hold water. So hopefully we're better, and hopefully we can close that policy gap. If council so directs, it's time for us to take action on it.
And I want to say I'm not critical of the developer. The developer's doing what they do. But when this latest phase came where these walls are now, and you saw like what was being proposed, why did we approve it? And why didn't at that point we try to come up with alternatives or other solutions? Like
Mr. McIntyre?
You had to have known that this is not at all what we would have been comfortable with.
Through the chair, simply we missed the mark. There was a policy gap. It was a combination of factors that drove that outcome, and certainly I think looking back on those development applications that they came forward, the rezonings that would go to council, there should have been more information around the site conditions. Let's see some representative cross sections to the site. Let's see what you're proposing. That was missed. It was dealt with at the subdivision stage. It's all technically correct, all safe according to the engineers that to design it and certify it, review it, approve it, and all that. So, in the end result was not a desirable outcome. So we're realizing that now, and as Bruce has said, if anything, we benefited from better knowing the problem and what some of the realistic solutions are.
Okay. Mr. Stepman?
I would just like to add that, yes, the existing situation is not acceptable, but there is enough blame to go around to broader than city staff. There was, when you say you're not blaming the developer, well, I do. I do blame a whole pile of the different equations. There was a preference stated for flat lots, and there was a push for flat lots, and there was an absence of acknowledgement that drove the significant retaining walls. The developer was responsible for building the development of the retaining walls. We are responsible for providing overall advice, but we're not solely responsible for the entire thing. And when I started seeing those walls, I raised the issue as a very high priority for us to deal with, that clearly we had to recognize that there were policy gaps and we needed to respond. But it's not just our responsibility to deal with that. It's the applicant themselves that has to propose something. They give us assurances that they'll be designed appropriately, and they were. They're all engineered. They all got engineering seals and stamps and all that kind of stuff. But from my perspective, there was a push to insist on flat lots on a mountain, and flat lots on a mountain are not appropriate. You have to build with the mountain. And so that has been my push all along. We all have something to learn from this, and we are, I think, adequately addressing it through the guidelines that are being proposed. But I just wanted to sort of highlight that it's not just staff's responsibility, it's a host of responsibilities.
Anything else, Mr. Hughes?
Well, I mean, they could be pushing for flat lots, but don't we push back and say, no, we don't want flat lots?
Should it? We have some responsibility, but it's not just our responsibility.
Is that it, Council?
Yeah.
Okay, I have myself next on the list. I'm glad to see this here. I've been raising this issue for a couple of years, Joseph, and on these walls up there, and the height of them, how they're built. So I have concerns about what's there, what's the liability on us, how they're going to function long term. But I do support the direction that you've taken on this report. I want to see a lower wall limit, more stepping back if you're going to go up. That part there. I like the use of different housing forms to take up the slope. I do think that if you want single-family homes, RS8, RS9, or whatever, you're going to have to build the slope like we did on Westside Plateau. You can't have all front or backyards flat. You're going to have to work around that. You can do certain things where you can maybe, at my house, it's flat on the front, but it slopes off the back, and the back comes off. So you can do things with the foundation, everything to build into the slope. We saw a couple applications last council meeting where they used the housing, the foundations to address the slope issues there and put it. So I think there's those design solutions that you're talking about in here. I'm very concerned about even the possibility of rear yard servicing it concerns me, and I know we talked Mr. Zazkis about it. I know it's limited in here, but the one issue, if there's retaining walls and in future having to have heavy equipment over the years go in there, then the fact that the difficulty of getting in there with people who will put sheds, they'll put little gardens, it's going to be very, very problematic for the city in the future to maintain those or have to go in and upgrade them in a number of years. So I know it's in the report. There's one thing I sort of put an X against. I said I don't really want to see, unless it's at the very short end of a block or something, that would be very limited. Mr. Irvine, you have a comment on?
One thing that I'd like to emphasize is what we're doing with the transition sites at this time is certainly initial conversations are very much around engineering solutions. We recognize that some of those engineering solutions, such as rear yard servicing, are more expensive for the city to maintain, and they are more difficult because people do put their playground equipment and such in the backyard. But building on a mountain is not as easy as building on a flat. The trade-off is deeper and deeper utilities in the front, which also causes us some challenges. We think we've come to a series of principles with the developer that we can work with. They include increased access points to get into those rear yards. They include an actual maintenance condition as part of the application so that we can understand how we could get in and how frequently we may have to get back in. That said, no question that there is an order of solutions. Land use, lot size, building typologies are first and foremost solutions before we get to other engineering-driven solutions.
And I would agree with that at this point right now. And I understand through the report that you're looking at a transitional phasing out of these lots. And I can understand because we don't want an abrupt drop-off. But I do think going out to the development community that we built Westwood Plateau, the people that built Westwood Plateau are building this area that they should have, and we did not have this type of retaining wall issued there. So we've got to move back to what the report says, building to topography, building to the slopes, getting away from you have to have a flat lot. I think that's, and I do think your one other broad applications, I think if we're going to do this policy for Burke Mountain, it should also apply citywide because we have very sloped areas throughout the city that we have to protect. We have some issues presently where we've done some things in Harbour Chines and different areas where we had some slope stability issues and stuff like that. So I think we need to make sure that development and retaining walls and these issues, Councillor Wilson, I thank him for his comments about the gap and why this happened. But let's not have this gap or something help in somewhere else in the city where we're dealing with in the future. So if we're going to fix it, let's not fix it just for one area. Let's make sure it's throughout the city. And I thought when we had the slope guidelines, and I was there to prove that this was going to, May and I, we talked about, we said, May, I remember clearly in those meetings, I don't want these big retaining walls, I don't want these ugly things, and we thought the slope development guidelines that we were going to.
It's right there, neighborhood plan, 3.6.
That's fine. That's fine. I'm going back to, I'm just reiterating what Councillor Reid and I talked about when this came forward. And our concerns about that, and May would agree that she, especially Councillor Reid, raised a lot of concerns about these, and so I think this is the right direction to fill the gap, as you mentioned, that's in our policy. And moving forward, I think we're going to take a more rigorous approach to this, that we don't have this ongoing situation, and then we will not be developing so-called flat lots to this degree.
And just to confirm, as mentioned, the Partington originally looked, Section 3.6, which was just referred to, and Section 3.6A limits the scope to commercial and multifamily. So that's partly where that gap comes through in the single family, which is something that we think we can correct.
Yep. Thank you very much. Next speaker is Councillor Marsden.
Thank you. I'll start where Councillor Asmussen left off, and that's in other parts of the city, because the subject of this report is retaining walls for Partington Creek. And I don't think this is a Partington Creek specific. I think it's any sloped lot across our city. I live in an area that's got some fairly significant slopes. I've got rear lot services in across the back of my yard, and the staff are there on an annual basis, doing whatever maintenance and upkeep they need to do. They're not disruptive at all when they're there. they typically don't block my driveway, so I'm able to get out. So I think there's a way in which it can work. But so I just want to be very cautious that we're not looking saying, well, yeah, this is kind of what we're going to do, but just here. Let's make sure that we're employing the same thought process across the city. Other comments, the question that Councillor Wilson asked is how did this happen? And the response is it was a policy gap, in part. So what I see here is not policy, but some guiding principles. So very directly then, are you comfortable that the guiding principles that you're putting forth are sufficient to address it? I like the tone of it. Are you comfortable that the guiding principles are sufficient, that it doesn't have to be set in stone in policy?
Through the chair, no, not at all. In anticipating a question that's coming, we have a combination of neighborhood plans which address the slope areas, define where they can be and what applies. We then have a bylaw, section 5.16, that has a specific exemption that allows those homes outside of a subdivision or within a subdivision application to be exempted from a 1.2 meter height. The tone of these particular principles would need to be turned into a policy if council so directs. That policy would be, depending on council's guidance, either applied within a community planning or applied as guidelines citywide. We would then work with those kind of tones to work with our other departments and with industry, UDI, to make sure they're comfortable with what we're saying. And we would then have to go back and modify our current bylaw, section 5.16, to remove the current gap that allows these homes to go forward without review.
Okay.
Is that fair, Jim?
Then that's the direction I would absolutely want to see us make sure we're going, that we're not just going to say, well, the guiding principles and that's going to be enough. Because that was the message I was hearing was, well, there's a gap, but we've got guiding principles. And so now what you're saying very clearly is that's not enough, but this is the next step towards something more concrete, excuse the pun.
Yeah, concrete as opposed to timber walls. If I could, Mr. Chair, and just to pick up on something the city manager said, which actually was bang on. We were speaking to it in terms of policy gap on our side here. There are other parties, and this is why...
It's not a blame game.
No, it's not.
How do we put forward the rules for future?
And there needs to be shifting in attitude and approach. It's also shifting the market a bit. There's a market out there that wants a flat house in a basement, and they don't want to have a step down, and so there's the market has to evolve somewhat. The developer has to understand that, and we have to make sure that we have our policies in place that give guidance to the approving officer. And we need to have a procedure in place to make sure that's being followed through. And what I'm asking the staff to do is that any more of these rezonings that are on the hillside going to council, they need to know. We need to see what's being proposed.
Okay. So to be clear, our city has hills. It's had it for 125 years, and we've been building on less than flat lots for 125 years, and we can continue to do so.
And we've got
it's challenging, but we need to find out and say where does it make sense.
And we have some very successful established neighborhoods where Councillor O'Neill is, where I live, and it takes a collaborative effort. Sometimes it takes a little concessions too. Some of the standards you got to be flexible, and but it can be done.
Okay, I just think we need to do the things that make sense, and I've the one that said all along. I think part of the solution is housing type, and let's make sure. Yeah, housing type and design, but let's make sure that we're not, forcing a single family detached into an area that probably would be better managed from a land use perspective and from a slope perspective with some type of multifamily solution. So I'm going to support the next steps you've got here. I think you've done some good work. We've done some tours in looking at solutions. Just recently I was talking to somebody and he talked about a development site just north of the village of Whistler. And again, some fairly significant topographies up there. And they've got some interesting solutions to deal with that. So I just think we need to get outside the box, so forget about just all flat lots and move forward. So thanks for your work on this.
Councillor Zerillo.
Thank you. Thank you for this report. Yeah, for sure we need to have an inclusive policy, and I thank staff for at least trying to get ahead of going forward, because we're only just begun, right? So I just want to say thanks for that. Two things I wanted to ask. First of all, overly high was mentioned in the report a few times. Can we have a definition in the policy about what overly high means? And why are you laughing?
Currently in our bylaw, if you don't go through the gap we've mentioned, we restrict retaining walls to 1.2 meters. During the building code, during the building process, our building inspectors can vary that by 100%, up to 2.4. It has been a challenge for us to determine how high is too high. And our sometimes it's a little too quick and easy as a regulator just to declare a number without really understanding all the different ways you can approach it. What we certainly know is what's going on the Hill doesn't work. What we've been trying to figure out is approaching it as to what is the best we can do, still produce a reasonable development, produce a viable development, and improve the livability of our community. We're trying to see where we can get the walls down to. The transition areas that we're looking at as we move away from tying into current services and looking both at building typologies, duplexes, townhouses, we're starting to see our draft plans around 2 meters. Is that too high? I think that's a question that if we develop a policy, we're going to have to seek guidance from council if they want to declare a number, or if it's more about, as Mr. McIntyre says, when you're looking at something from zoning, do we show you enough information in cross sections that you'll know what's right when you see it? And I think we're going to have to test that out if we develop a policy. Because I'm a little reluctant just to say 1.2 meters on a mountain like that. It is a challenge.
So I guess my point is I would appreciate a clear definition when the policy comes out. My second is around the fill, and I've had some conversations with folks that say that till is being used for the fill. I don't know if this is true, but I'm telling you it's a rumor that's going around. It reminds me of pyrite. I lived in Quebec many times, and they had a lot of pyrite being used many years, and it ended up being a problem later. And when you buy a new home now, many of the inspections include a test that you have pyrite, and it costs the government a lot of money. So it's in my mind that perhaps as part of this policy there should be something about the fill, what we're using for fill, what's allowable for fill, and especially with the rainwater. My last points are just around costs. So I like to bring personal experience to council, and I remember this conversation many years ago when I first saw some of these walls, and I was saying when I lived in Texas, I lived in a neighborhood that had these walls, and here were some of the issues. And Councillor Reid talked about it today, the impact on stratas, and I can tell you that when I lived in that neighborhood, which was a master planned neighborhood, we all had to pay a subsidy because of these walls. So it's been done, there's precedent for it, and I would personally like to understand what are the true costs to our taxpayers of what's happening on Burke Mountain. I remember a conversation a few years back about how surprised we were, how economical it was for the upgrades of the utilities and the drainage that were happening in South Coquitlam versus the north. And this lanes, the rear yards, access, like there's just so many factors that are so much more expensive to build on Burke Mountain. And I actually don't believe in adding a surcharge. I believe that we're not a user-pay society, but I would really like to understand, is it more economical? We just had a presentation earlier from Oakdale. Does it make way more sense for a taxpayer on buying economics to be doing stuff in Oakdale before we're doing stuff on Burke Mountain? So I'm very concerned about the costs, and it says on page 7 of the report at the end that this is potentially going to mean more staff dealing with these retaining walls. So I asked this question when I first got elected: how much does it cost for a development permit to go through our desk? And I think we should understand how much it costs for it to go through our desks for Burke Mountain versus the latter parts of Coquitlam. So those are my comments, and I really commend you for getting all of this, and I believe some of it came from a conversation at a Christmas party. So it's good when people get together because things come out. So thank you for that.
Mayor Stewart.
Thank you. I'll begin with, I don't have fear of these walls. I have faith in the engineering that went behind them. I know that we have other instances where we have unit masonry retaining walls, for example, and I'm reminded of Keats Drive, 2900 block Keats Drive. Councillor Reid knows it. It's where the developer opted to divide the road in two in order to take up about 4 meters of slope at the peak of the difference in the middle of the road, which means there you've got 12 meters of retaining wall with potentially a fully loaded tandem dump truck full of gravel with 100 tons of materials on the edge of the retaining wall. The restrictive covenants in this particular location on Burke are that you can't put anything in the backyard, and if you put even a wading pool, you breach the covenant. So we're not going to get loads other than the soil and rain. When I first saw them, I went up and I walked them, and I recognized the drainage systems that they were putting in, because the drainage would be the key element to make sure the soil doesn't be a problem in the rains, obviously. I don't like them at all. I've said it to the developer. I think this was more than just problematic. I think it's a breach of their duty to the community to develop properly. I'm reminded of a time when a developer had, and in fact the reason for the wording, as I recall, the wording currently is that they're exempt if they're undertaken at the time of development. The retaining walls are put in place at the time of development. That is the time that the roads are put in and the services are put in, etc. Because I can think of another where the developer, I think there was 20 meters of difference in elevation between the two adjacent parallel roads on the slope. The developer was the city, and no retaining walls were put in. It was simply, you bought the sloped lot, and the upper folks typically and invariably, in fact, built a 12-foot tall retaining wall, typically out of wood, on their back property line. And those remain today off Sorrento. And, that was 25, 30 years ago. And the lower houses the main floor of the lower house stares out at a retaining wall. And in fact, the upper floor stares out at the retaining wall and the 6-foot fence on top of the retaining wall. Similar conditions to what we have here, although they're allowed to put plantings. So I'm left with the developer wanting a flat lot is something we should simply almost prohibit, because in the case I just cited, the 20-meter elevation difference between the two streets, 2.5, 3 meters is taken up in the front driveway, and almost all of those houses have a 12 or 14-foot basement in order to make up, so that's a whole extra bunch of stairs, but you put a 12-foot retaining wall in the basement, and now you can flatten out the backyard if you to desire with only a 12-foot tall retaining wall, all of which combines together. If you didn't do any of that and you wanted a flat lot at the bottom and a flat lot at the top, you would end up with the kinds of retaining walls we see up in Burke, and I think they're problematic primarily from the point of view that they make a lousy neighborhood. I don't see them as I say, I think I trust the engineering behind them, but I think we need to, as we did with the current rules, they were adjusted because of the perception of a problem down in a municipally developed development, and I don't think the municipality intended to have 12-foot retaining walls at the back of the downstream lots on Sorrento, but they got them. They got the same thing, almost shorter walls on the next two streets as well. So let's find the regulatory gap and fix it. I recognize that regulatory gaps come up because things happen that I would never have envisioned a developer like Westville doing a retaining wall like that. Primarily because I think it looks, it makes the lower lots worth almost enough less than the value you gain on the flat upper lot. I think from my perspective, it was not a particularly sound development decision either. But we should, even if it were a sound development decision, the municipality owes a duty to step in and say, no, that doesn't cut it. So we as council need to find out about those anomalies, so that if regulatory changes need to be made by us, we can make them then. As I say, Keats is still there. It won't move in my lifetime. And it's arguably more tenuous situation. But those people who have concerns, I don't question their concerns at all. I think the walls will stay, but I don't blame anyone for being concerned about the height of them. They're not appropriate.
Thank you. And Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, thank you. It's just a follow-up questions based on points raised by Councillor Wilson and Councillor Asmussen, then an answer that Mr. Urban gave to Councillor Asmussen. So I really need to understand what effect the Partington Creek neighborhood plan or any neighborhood plan we have has on a situation like this. 3.6 in the Partington Creek neighborhood plan is about neighborhood and site design. It says in the opening paragraphs, policies are needed to encourage new development to work with the land to create viable, high-quality developments. It then lists 8 policies. The first of those 8, and it's not, and the other 7 don't follow under, and they aren't part of A. They're separate, and I think you maybe need to restate that. The first one of those 8 does say require all commercial and multifamily development to obtain a development permit. It doesn't say that the rest of the policies are only for multifamily commercial. The other 7, they practically all deal with this slopes as identified in the opening paragraph of this section. A lot of the land is over 10% slope. We've got to consider unique design solutions for the topographical constraints. We've got to design sites and buildings to respond to steep slopes. We've got to build the slope with the slope to help preserve the natural topography. Where a retaining wall is located in a public right-of-way, it should be visually interesting. We've got to follow the natural terrain using a system of smaller step retaining walls instead of one large uniform wall. I remember with this, and I remember seeing some illustrations that illustrated this when we passed the neighborhood plan. And so I really need to understand why this was insufficient. Because it doesn't seem to, from council's point of view, that there was a gap there. I mean, it was dealt with, and we're all pretty happy with it, I remember. I remember thinking, yeah, that's the way to build in a mountain. So,
Mr. Irving.
Thank you. We're getting into some detailed policy, but those details are very important because of what we're trying to achieve here. In particular, A through F of 3.6 of the Partington Creek plan, and my apologies, that was actually developed at a time I wasn't here, as you remember. It was Mr. Johansson who brought it forward. They were originally combined with a single-family piece as well that did not go forward. The first item requires development permits for commercial and multifamily, and that's very important because as soon as we require development permits, we have the opportunity to really apply all those other policies you quoted, but also bring in the bylaw. And the bylaw has a maximum of 1.2 meters as guidance for the development officer for a retaining wall. Unfortunately, that same section of the bylaw, section 5.16, as through the chair as the mayor was just essentially quoting, allows for projects that are brought through subdivision to be exempted from that requirement. That's what we're referring to as the gap. And that gap, when this policy was written, at that time, it was sort of thought of, hey, we aren't having a problem. We've been building for years ourselves. We haven't had this problem. Our stakeholders certainly said, why are you creating a policy when there hasn't been one? And what we should have really sort of figured out is exactly what happened. As we combined smaller and smaller lots with steeper and steeper slopes, weaknesses in our regulatory framework were exposed.
So does this policy then that was passed neighborhood plan not get any teeth unless it's embedded in another bylaw of some sort then? Or like I understand, maybe I don't understand how the neighborhood plan actually has teeth, or where the rubber hits the road.
The neighborhood plan, yeah, there's several processes involved in several ways to bring any particular development forward. What clearly was missed here when the original idea that staff had related to single-family homes was not passed staff needed to catch that the exemption took away the teeth in one particular item on that policy. And it was clearly amiss, because that gap has allowed what has happened to occur. It wasn't anticipated because we've been developing for so long single-family homes without development permits, with a deliberate idea of not trying to over-regulate when there hasn't been a problem. So philosophically that went well, but we happened to get hit by a bit of a storm of smaller lots, being a real driver, steeper slopes, and a specific exemption to that policy you cited.
And if I could just add to that, to the chair, by closing that gap, setting clear policy, it's council's ability to provide a framework for the approving officer. The subdivision approving officer has a lot of latitude. Obviously, they have to make sure the bylaws of the city are being upheld. But if there's policy statements that come through from council, and often those reside in neighborhood plans, but this would be an overarching policy. I think we're talking citywide. It provides clear direction for the subdivision approving officer to make sure that that's being upheld through their subdivision approval process. As well, as I said before, I want to make sure when applications, rezonings come forward to council on hillside sites, I want us to have a good understanding of what's being proposed there.
Right, and council's on record as supporting these 8 policies already, you know. You've heard from council on that part. Good.
Okay. That's everybody. Oh, Mayor Stewart.
One last question. Is it possible for us then to, so as I say, the challenge that was pointed out in the last example I used came up primarily because each individual lot owner was able to build their own wall, and they're all different. The same thing that Molnar ended up with on some of the stuff that was done in River Heights, where each individual lot owner, and then there are other retaining walls where the wall goes right across boundaries, right across the property lines, and it was developed at time of development, and therefore would have been exempt from this policy. Are we able to, and it might address a number of other issues, require a development permit for anything that crosses a property line? Because if you look at the bird streets up in the Western Plateau, there it was just a fence that crossed property lines, but it became really problematic because a fence 25 years later is no longer a fence. It's a pile of rotting wood, and it crosses property lines. So, and we've got the same with the Peeler Core retaining walls on the back onto Chilco, for example. They cross property lines, and as they start to fail 25 years later, because they weren't designed for 50 years.
Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. You asked some really good points there. Firstly, just a little success story. The bird streets up there, 3/4 of them have replaced their fencing, and it all looks very good. And every time I walk through there, I just can't but, be happy for those neighborhoods, a little grassroots organization and action made it happen, so that's good. But the mayor makes a really good point, and I think on one hand, we've been fortunate with the development on Burke Mountain. For the most part, it's a large developer, a lot of experience. It's doing the overall development for us. It's not just, creating subdivision lots. And to be honest, that's what we used to encounter in a lot of the subdivisions in Kelowna. You get out in some of the far-reaching places, and they'd just be getting subdivisions, and they'd prove up a driveway access, and there would be the water and sewer, and it'd be up to the builder to somehow figure it all out. Where the house is going to go, how they're going to retain it, and it could be sometimes a dog's breakfast. Here, at least, there's an overall comprehensive plan for a neighborhood. So I think we're at least one step advanced in that. And what we need to do is through these policies and guidelines get that a little more moderate. The question still remains, over time, who's responsible? And I think one of the things that Bruce worked out with engineering is, for the most part, we'd like to see these retaining walls outside the road allowances. We need our road allowances for utilities and transportation and all that stuff. So the retaining walls need to be outside. Then the question comes up, okay, if we go with these pre-built retaining walls at the time of subdivision that cross across multiple properties that may have tiebacks and drainage uphill and protect the downhill lot, how all that's going to work. And my understanding is there's easements in place for that, and Bruce may be able to comment. That's certainly something we'll look at more closely because I think it's a really critical point.
Yeah, and it's not just across the property line. If there were Peeler Core, there weren't, on the Sorrento example, there are no Peeler Core 12 foots. But if there had been, and they started to fail now, it's impossible to repair them because you have to airlift an excavator into the backyard and then airlift the soil out in order to build a new retaining wall. And so, obviously, we do need a solution that takes into account that the dwindling supplies of land include land that
Can't be developed.
that either can't be developed or can't be developed with large-scale retaining walls the size that we're seeing now. And where even as a smaller-scale retaining wall, there has to be some accommodation for the eventual replacement if it's not built out of concrete.
Mr. Clerk, has the motion been moved?
It's not been moved.
Is the mover? Move receipt. Moved by Marsden, second by Reed. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Receipt carries unanimously.
Category of
Thanks. Shades of Secret Ridge.
Mr. Clerk, solution.
Next item 6, is the report of the General Manager of Parks, Recreation, and Culture Services, and it concerns his department's policy for unsolicited P3 proposals. We have introductory comments by the General Manager, reports before you for information.
What? I want to speak when this guy gets up here.
You always want to speak when he's up here.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
I'm just wondering, for those, I don't know if this report has any urgency. I don't think it does.
It does not. Everything is important, but clearly today's agenda is very, very large, and we're happy to postpone the discussion here, Mr. Mayor.
Just thinking we have to contemplate one or two of these reports have to go away until September, perhaps.
All right, there's a
deferral then.
Second.
On this one? Okay.
Yes.
All those in favor?
Mr. Chair, just before you vote, I'm going to give a date, so the first meeting in September, not deferral to the next meeting, but the first meeting in September.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'll take that referral as a show of support. that was the staff.
Well, yeah.
Funny.
Time for jokes.
We are very supportive of postponing it, Mayor and Chair. Thank you.
Is there anything else
No, but I wouldn't move if I were you.
are the other items times? Pardon?
Need vote.
A vote on
Yep.
this.
All those in favor?
Thanks, Chair.
Opposed? Carried. That was just the only one we wish to defer?
So we'll move to item 7, which concerns the Sports Services Review Update. Introductory comment by the General Manager. Report before you for information.
Move receipt.
Second.
Any comments, questions? Councillor Zarrillo?
I just had a comment. Thank you for the report. I just had a comment about the strategic goal. I find it easier if we just keep the strategic goals to the strategic goals that are
Specific
defined
in the cities,
Because
yes.
I don't remember a strategic goal about these things, so
Yes.
I do look at them every time to see if it's aligned with our.
Just a comment, and certainly go work with the clerk on this. We typically would add our own the Parks and Recreation Master Plan goals. With that, we're happy to stick with the city's corporate goals and
If you could
strategies.
if we just see the city's corporate goal and then
And
why
then separately?
you think this supports the city's corporate goal, that's great. But it's just
Okay.
easier for me to make
Okay.
a decision
That's
when
fine.
it aligns with.
Thank you for the comment.
Thank you.
Mayor Stewart?
I'll support the second half of what Councillor Zillow said, but I do value, I appreciated some of the adjustments because it lets me contemplate whether the strategic goals are the right ones. And we always have to contemplate whether we are working toward the right strategic goals or those need adjustment. But it is an important thing. I agree that we should state clearly which one of the current, what it is that we're doing here.
Okay, Mr. Stebler?
Perhaps you could put it in 2 paragraphs. I have heard commentary in the past that when we just talk about the city's strategic goal, it sometimes doesn't fit and it becomes boilerplate and sometimes meaningless. Perhaps we can just split it in 2 paragraphs, sort of like link it to the city's strategic goal, but then also I find it quite helpful to see how it fits, and a little bit of elaboration sometimes is helpful.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Mayor Stewart, you done? Councillor Zarrillo?
Well, thank you, Pete, because actually I like to hear their reasoning behind why they think that fits for that strategic goal. And sometimes it's there and sometimes it isn't. So if there's a way to elaborate on it, how they feel it folds under, I think that's great because that helps me.
Okay. Do I have a mover and seconder on this report?
It has been moved and seconded already.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item, please.
Item 8 concerns an update regarding the Crunch Trail. Report before you for information.
So moved. It's my favorite place.
Any questions? All those in favor?
I move our next meeting be at the top of the crunch.
There's some comments.
Question?
Is there no time for comments today?
Yeah, no, we want to move through this question if we can, please. Councillor Neal, do you have a question?
No.
Anybody else? Just
it would have been comments.
Sage nudge at the bottom.
Well, maybe it kind of is a question.
Kind of a question. We're just trying to move this along.
Depends on the intonation.
So I've been doing the crunch a lot, talking to a lot of people. I know there was a lot of survey input, which is fantastic. Kudos to everybody involved in getting such a engaged survey. The number one feedback I hear is the crossing of the streets, both from the drivers, who the mindless people hiking group after group don't let the cars through, and from the hikers who feel unsafe. And I know in the report it said that looking at parking and traffic issues is a consideration. But I'm just wondering, have we looked at all, or will we be looking at the feasibility of maybe pedestrian crossings? I'm just
parking away from the...
Through the chair, in terms of feedback, number one concern is top three: crossings, parking, washrooms.
Yes.
So certainly we are planning to look at crossings, and we're working with transportation planning already to determine what would be appropriate for those crossings. The crossing that's of particular, focus is the Guilford Way crossing, because that's the one that's currently not signalized at all. But we're certainly aware that that's a concern and a priority. For the residents, yeah.
Excellent.
And we are also looking at alternate ways of putting in parking at washrooms.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. I look forward to it.
So you're hinting what's in the feedback from residents. So my question was just about the secondary staircase, because obviously we're having to move forward with something before we've gotten the feedback from the community. So was there a lean towards the community being okay with the secondary staircase in the consultation to the community?
In fact, I would say we had more than a lean. Staff had already made some overt thinking around, because that is the most popular part of the crunch. Yeah. So we had already anticipated the possibility, and we were planning to probably twin it. And this came as a very good opportunity to do that. So
that when we see it in September, we'll see that input from the community.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Reid.
Thank you. Two things. I only know about the lower part. I don't go to the upper part. But I do know about Lansdowne, and because I used to live on it. So one of the big things for me was when people park too close to the crosswalk, like somebody doesn't necessarily monitor that in the evenings, and then you can't see people jumping out. And the third thing is we have schools there. Right at the bottom, we have the little elementary school, which has an empty parking lot at night, and we have Scott Creek Middle, which also is pretty empty at night. So I think maybe our partner, the school board, might be one to see if we can't use their parking, especially after school hours.
It's locked.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, it's it's good. They use the crunch with the kids.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Mayor Stewart.
Unfortunately, one of the realities of people who use the crunch and people who exercise and people who want to use the track around, they don't want to park very far. They want to park right next to it, and so they can get right into the exercising portion rather than walking a block, which perhaps it's human nature. One of the comments that we hear often from, and it's not particularly related to this doubling or this particular project, but we hear it often from the folks at Northside Church on Lansdowne at David, that they don't mind people using their parking lots. In fact, they leave their washrooms open, and the people fill up the water bottles at the fountain in the lobby of the church. But is there a way of collaborating somewhat between the church and a little bit more formally? And I think it's worth having a dialogue with them, because midway washrooms would be useful, and we got to figure out how to make that work, whether it's through them or through some other.
Okay, thank you.
And through the chair, we are talking to them.
Good.
Need washrooms on that part of the trail?
So it's been moved.
Taking ownership of the crunch. It's a great thing.
Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item, please.
Yep.
Next item, item 9, report of the General Manager of Engineering and Public Works, concerns water quality monitoring update, reports before you for information.
So moved.
Second.
Second. Councillor O'Neill.
Quick question. About on page 3, however, there were elevated levels of conductivity in Watkins and Smiling Creeks. What's conductivity? I only know it in an electrical sense. These weren't electrically charged streams.
So they go under the power lines.
Through the chair, conductivity is a measure of electrical conductivities, and that's usually due to ions or salts in the liquid, and that can come from a number of sources. Just salts from minerals due to turbidity or other debris in the water. It could come from road salts, kind of washed off from the road.
Okay, thank you. Another question while you're here is is there any natural baseline that I don't think there is, in terms of turbidity? They talk about some elevated levels of turbidity in some areas, and as they certainly follow storms and things like that, but we certainly know intuitively that in a natural setting, a stream will have more turbidity after a storm because is there any way that we can is there a natural baseline that we can compare this to?
Yeah, through the chair. I can look into that. I'm not sure what a natural baseline for turbidity is. The kind of good, satisfactory, and these kind of red levels that were established in our water quality monitoring protocols, that was worked through with the Ministry of Environment. So we can check with them to see what type of guidelines they have.
Mother Nature could produce red levels itself.
Absolutely.
Right. So,
yes.
So I want people to be aware of that, and then maybe in future reports we can highlight the fact that there's this uncertainty whether this is unusual or not, or it's just.
The best example of natural levels of very high turbidity is in the drinking water reservoirs. Historically, there was high levels of turbidity in the drinking water reservoirs, even though there was no development of any kind in the very steep slopes that led into it. It's because the streams, high rainfall streams, very turbid. They would cause high levels of turbidity both in the drinking water in Coquitlam and Seymour, and that's in fact why they moved to filtration some years ago in those watersheds.
Right, well, that's good to know, and I think it's good for the public to know that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay. Check off Mother Nature. Yeah.
Marsden.
Just a quick question. On attachment 4, we've got 4 different tables, and it's speaking to on one of the points, anyways, on Gillette, you've got looking at 04 to 06 and then 15-16 results, and the others, tables 3 and 4, there's just 04, 06. Are we not testing in those areas anymore? I mean, there's like Falaka. We looked at the numbers there, but then we didn't look at it again in 15-16. Is there a reason we chose not to do there? It looks like we're looking at everything south of the gravel pits and that, but nothing to see, to Councillor O'Neill's point, what happens up above it.
Yeah, through the chair, it's probably a question for environmental services staff to answer.
Yep.
Sure.
Hi, so the sampling sites have changed slightly over the years. So the Gillette site is the site that we're now using downstream of the pits, and then the hatchery is the site upstream. The Fulakwa site is hard to access, and it's on private property.
Okay.
So we're not using that one anymore, but Gillette is also just downstream of the pits, and it's the site where we also do our grab sampling. So we're being consistent where our continuous monitoring is being conducted and also where our grab samples are being conducted.
Okay. So from a science perspective, typically you're looking at the same methodologies each time. So what we're saying is that the methodology has changed, so we really can't be comparing numbers from 15-16 back to local 406 because they're sampled from different areas, correct?
They're very similar areas. The Upper Coquitlam site also had some instability in some of the creeks that entered into that site. So by moving it slightly downstream to the hatchery, we were able to isolate some of the natural turbidity sources that come in that general area. So we've just refined the sampling sites slightly over the past 10 years.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much.
Adjournment.
Second?
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. 10 minutes.
I can make that change over in 7 minutes.